and the date.
All right.
Got it.
Everyone, I wanted to introduce our amazing speaker, Tiffany Street. I'm going to let her tell you all about herself because I just don't think I could even do her justice. She's so charismatic and smart, and I just think you're going to love her presentation. So without further ado, I want to introduce Tiffany.
Yay.
And thank you guys all for being here this evening. My name is Tiffany Street. I am the founder of Street Creative Works. I'm incredibly honored that the PPA has asked me to speak with you all tonight. I hope you learn a little bit more about the fine art industry and the world, and the process of becoming a fine artist, if that's something that you're interested in, or just even learning more about how it works. If you have any questions during the presentation, please drop them in the chat too, so I can address them as they come in, but we'll also have time at the end. I'll be sticking around if you have any other questions. So let's get started. Okay. So I want to share my experience with you. I want to share my background, which has led me to where I am today as a consultant and curator. And specifically, I'll be discussing how to bridge the gap between commercial and fine art photography. I've always been drawn to art. I think it's something that all of us here have within us. At a young age, I was awarded more scholastics, arts, and writing awards than any other student in the country, both writing and photography. It's an opportunity for high school students to work with their teachers and receive feedback on what they've been creating, and also get opportunities like college scholarships and things like that. I was able to accept my award by walking across Carnegie Hall with a large group of other very accomplished young artists. And even through this opportunity, I was able to intern with Rolling Stone magazine. Art runs through my veins, really. It's been impossible for me to deny. I really feel like I've tried to get away with it more than get away from it more than once. And, you know, it just continues to stick with me. I too was a contemporary photographer, or commercial photographer, excuse me. So I started as a commercial photographer. That's how I got into photography. I was shooting weddings, family portraits, headshots, you know, the infant portraits. And through this work, I was able to hone my technical skills. So I was working both with studio and natural light. I learned about editing using Photoshop, using things like Bridge to organize photos, how to archive my work, how to keep it all really organized, things like color balancing, all that good stuff. And through that work too, I was able to develop really important business and customer service skills, you know, working with clients, trying to determine their needs, which is something I utilize with every single client that I work with now, because it's very important to me to be able to define, like, what was in my biography that was sent out. I don't know if everyone read that, but being able to craft these boutique projects for the artists that I work with, because every artist that I work with is incredibly unique, and all their needs are simultaneously or similarly very unique. So, you know, maybe you want to work with a gallery, or maybe you'd rather work with a museum, or maybe you really want to work on making your portfolio tighter, or maybe you don't understand how to create a body of work. And skipping through. So while I was also working as a commercial photographer, I started doing self-portraiture. I had a lot of free time back then. So I was exploring photography through myself. You know, it's not always easy to access subjects, especially when you come from a very small town in the middle of Indiana. So I became my own subject. And this was back in the days of Flickr. I don't know if you guys remember that, like 10, 12, 13 years ago, it was the really big thing. This was a different time. It's amazing how much has changed in the past 15 years. You know, back when YouTube was incredibly nascent, it had only existed for a few years. Influencers were a thing of the future. That world didn't really exist yet. And during this time, it was almost, I don't want to say it was a hobby, because I was, you know, working as a commercial photographer, trying to make a career doing that. But I was also a professional jazz and classical guitarist. So I was poised to go to to do that as my career. So I was practicing 6 to 10 hours a day, auditioning at some of the best music schools around the country, performing to several thousand capacity crowds. And at one of these schools that I was auditioning at, I decided to tour the fine art building. I decided to tour the photography school, and something kind of clicked for me. Like something in the back of my head, you know, kind of said like, maybe this is the path for you. Maybe this is something that you should pursue. And oddly enough, not long after that, I developed severe carpal tunnel in my wrist. So it was really devastating. It was traumatic, and especially as a young person, to have to reevaluate the path that I had planned on going down for the rest of my life. It was really difficult. So it was almost an accident that I decided to pursue a career in arts administration. That took me to Indiana University, the School of Public and Environmental Affairs, SPIA, and they have an arts administration program there. It was actually, at the time, I'm guessing it's still up there, but it was right behind Yale, as far as those programs are concerned. And I was able to study classes like contemporary artist, opera management, music industry. So there was a large chunk of the business side of the art world in general. So not necessarily just visual arts or fine arts, but really every angle of anything related to creative arts. And so why did I decide to study art? Like I said, it was almost an accident. I actually decided to pursue also the arts, and I was going to go to school for fine arts. I was going to study photography, but then I learned that I had to take foreign languages, and I didn't really want to do that. So I found the School of Public and Environmental Affairs, where I was able to study overseas instead. And it was very fortuitous, actually. And through that, another big thing that I had to do, the bulk of my education lied in intensive studio art classes. So most of that was in photography, but there was also a lot more to that. This is a series of work I did, one of my first projects. So besides just digital photography, still at that point, there was a lot of film photography classes. And one of those, several of those were 4x5, large format. So, you know, this is the View camera. I don't know if any of you have used those before. They're incredibly fun. It's the Ansel Adams kind of camera with the sheet over your head, developing film in a completely dark room. You know, it's kind of creepy, but it's very fun, you know, hauling around this monstrosity of a camera, like through the snowy winters of Indiana, you know, like trudging through the snow, carrying this big suitcase of a camera. In this series, this is from my series called Wealthy Guest. So it was one of the first projects I did with the View camera, and I ended up rolling up sheets into these very abstract shapes and created these beautiful black and white images that could be enlarged to, you know, 4 by 5 foot or larger. Very dense, very rich, very detailed. It's an amazing medium of photography. I encourage everyone to explore it if you have the ability to do so. It's definitely not the cheapest, and it's very expensive to access film like that now, but it's very rewarding too. So one of the other projects I did, which might resonate with some of you, as I think a natural bridge between commercial and fine art photography for a lot of us is documentary photography. So I was studying large format photography with documentary portrait photographer Jeff Woolen. He's represented by Catherine Edelman in Chicago. Again, working with a lot of really, really accomplished people, working or going to school at Indiana University. We were really lucky. I was incredibly lucky to have access to some amazing resources. And Jeff Woolen, whom you'll hear about a little bit more later, it highlights going to Indiana University, the importance of connections. I also encourage you all to check out his work. He is a fantastic example of a documentary photographer. And also a portrait photographer. He's made his entire career basically out of this. He's done bodies of work about Holocaust survivors, and another project, which I'll get into a little bit more. So at Indiana University, I was able to participate in critiques, hours, thousands. I think I added it up one time. It was thousands of hours of critiques, not even just working in labs and things like that, but honing the skills to constructively dissect my work, others' work, and see what is working and what is not, and develop the language to be able to talk about my own work. Most importantly, you know, being able to say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I know something like an institutional degree is not something a lot of us can obtain. They're very expensive, but there are many other ways to do that now. With the promulgation of the internet and all of the resources it proffers, we have, you can seek out things like crit clubs, or watching YouTube videos, engaging in blog posts, or even there are Facebook groups now with contemporary art groups where you can post your own work and receive feedback. So I encourage you all to seek opportunities out like that, because even if you don't have an institutional opportunity, there are so many other ways to do that now that didn't exist even just a few years ago. I actually run crit clubs, so if anyone is interested in participating or learning more, my contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So this is a series of work I did featuring my grandmother. She's now 95 years old, and so this is actually a very interesting timestamp. It's also an example of how portraiture can blend into documentary photography. So I was creating a portrait of her, not only through, like on the left, literal portraits of her, but of her life and the small details that composed her life. And, you know, this very interesting moment, my grandfather had just passed away. There were these little remnants of him still being left there, or him still being there without physically being there. You know, here on the left is a photo of her showing me her walking down the beach with her two sons holding her up. And on the right, you have her calendar with all of the scribbles and the little pieces and bits of her life that we're able to capture as documentary photographers. And it's not really unlike the commercial photography world, because essentially we're doing the same thing, right? We are, as commercial photographers, our goal is to show these people and show details of their lives. And especially, you know, in the past 2 decades, how commercial photography has become a lot more about like lifestyle commercial photography, where we have to dig in and represent the people that we're working with. And so the same thing applies to documentary photography. Oh. Let's see. Oh. Having a lapse. So on the left, you can see, here's another just little bit. You see this bit of my grandpa that still remains in her life. And on the right, you see her name, and you get this intimate look into her life. So this was one of the first documentary photography projects I did. And at Indiana University, one thing that was incredibly challenging about working in the fine art department or working in studio art classes is that you're often given an assignment and said, and you're told to create a fantastic body of work in about 2 weeks, 20 to 25 images, and have a very solid concept. So it was a really good opportunity for me to, a very accelerated opportunity, I guess I should say, to, and it forced me to figure some of these things out. Seems like, okay. So this is a more conceptual body of work I did later in my education called the Ephemera series. And it's a little controversial, like I said, a little bit more conceptual, but it's also an example of how you can take your fine art career. It doesn't have to lie in portraiture. It doesn't have to lie in something that you've seen before. You can really get creative if you sit down and like figure out how, what you'd like to convey as an artist. And one important thing for me to convey as an artist was to represent the overlooked. Even like with the series on my grandmother, it was, how do I represent? One thing that's important to me is representing the small details, really digging into things. And like I said, at Indiana University, I learned how to develop bodies of work. I've noticed working with photographers who are trying to get more into the fine art field, coming from a commercial background, we know how to create beautiful portraits. We've got the technical skills, but maybe you don't know how to turn them into a story. And that's such an important part of being a visual artist. It's not enough to just create portraits and hang them on a wall. They have to tell a story. Whatever story that you might want to tell, it has to be integrated and it has to communicate something that's important to you. And again, you have to be able to communicate that. let's see, it's moving a little slowly. So here's another example of that. So I did a large body of work of actually little pieces of hair and materials that I found on the ground, and I photographed them on a backdrop. Again, a technical skill that I developed as a commercial photographer. So you can really bring your education and your knowledge of what you've done in commercial photography into your fine art career. So next slide. Another thing that I learned at Indiana University, I didn't just study photography, but I had to study other mediums as well. So I studied painting, sculpture, textiles, and this was incredibly valuable. This led me actually to become an abstract painter. That's something I do as well. And it not only is it just worthwhile for you to do that, but you will learn more about color theory, composition, more about artists, art history. And one of the first exhibitions I actually curated was I took over, I was given the opportunity to curate an exhibition at the sculpture school. So I took over the entire sculpture building. I brought in about 30 other artists and included video artists, people that brought in like sculptures that you had to work around. One of them was actually called karaoke, where the guest of the exhibition opening were able to sit in a car and all of the viewers around them could hear what was going on, and the lyrics of whatever the audience chose were projected inside the car. So why I'm saying this, it's a very cool way to explore different avenues that you can move into a fine art career. It doesn't necessarily have to be the hung on the wall framed gallery kind of style work. There are so many different ways you can creatively explore that. And it was a very PS1 MoMA kind of space. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but it allows people to interact with art. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail about that because that's something that's very important to me. Also, while I was at Indiana University, another incredibly valuable opportunity was that I was able to study overseas, again, with Jeff Woolen, also with one of the curators at the Louvre. I was able to go to some of the top European museums in the world. And again, it's just, if you don't have access to an institutional education, there are so many other ways to do that. So I studied art history and fine art photography, really diving into the history of photography in France as well. And to summarize, if you're unable to get an institutional education, you can research, you can absorb yourself in books, articles, websites, whatever you can find. Like I said, there's so many resources available to us now just through the internet. And of course, there are physical ways to do that too, even if you go to the library and pick up a book. So it's very important that you dive in as deeply as possible. I can't stress that enough. Like us as artists, as fine artists, it behooves us to do that research. It's almost necessary. I can't imagine being able to do it without a pretty intense understanding of art history and contemporary art. So after I graduated, one of my last museum jobs was at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, actually just north of my hometown in Indiana, where I began as an intern, and in about a year I became the head curator. It was pretty unprecedented as far as jobs like that goes. It was a really fortuitous opportunity. And all of the examples of exhibitions that I'm going to show you in the next few slides are of contemporary fine art photographers, so I thought that they would be relevant and valuable for you guys to learn about. Firstly, here's an example of an exhibition that I curated. It was a 3-part exhibition, and one of the galleries consisted of work by photographer Timothy Archibald. Timothy Archibald is actually a commercial photographer, but he did this body of work about his autistic son. So like my series with my grandmother, it's not just portraits of his son, but he included the ephemera that was a necessary part, or I shouldn't say necessary, but the little pieces that involved his son. There's a Band-Aid with his son's name written on it. So you see these little details. With documentary photography, you don't want to just do portraiture. There are so many other ways you can do that. So with this exhibition with his, I was actually curating a three gallery exhibition of artists either with disabilities or working with artists with disabilities. So there was this one, and there was also one featuring artists from the permanent collection, which I wrote didactics for. And didactics, for anyone that don't know, anyone that doesn't know what they are the text panels and things like that that you see when you walk into a museum or a gallery, explaining why a curator worked on a show, or what their purpose is, or why an artist was included in a show, or maybe why an artist did something that they did. And Timothy is actually a San Francisco based photographer. And as I said, he mostly does commercial work, and he did this body of work. I actually came across it. One thing a lot of people don't realize about a curator is we do a lot of research. A large bulk of my work is doing research. So that can be in books. Maybe I see a publication and I see that a private collector owns this piece of work and it inspires me to do a show. Or maybe I think when I found Timothy, I was just looking things up online. I came across a news article where he was featured and this project was featured. I reached out to him and we started coordinating an exhibition. This was his first large scale exhibition. He had never done something like this in the past. And just simply by putting himself out there, he then was able to sell 10 prints to the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. They acquired 10 of his prints. One of the second exhibitions that I did in this, three-tiered exhibition was featuring Leon Borenstein. He photographed, and the title of the body of work is Sharon. He photographed his mentally and physically disabled daughter and her life. And you can see another example of how documentary and photography involves more than just a portrait. It involves really intimate details of their relationship. And this actually traveled from the West Coast. So it was in one museum, I believe in San Francisco. And so we brought it to Indiana. So it's an example of how one opportunity can lead to another. I'm guessing Leon, when he presented this, or when he started working with the museum out West, he wasn't going into this thinking this is going to turn into something much bigger, but through networking and connections and like I said, one opportunity can lead to another. So we can never discount how valuable something small can be, because it can always turn into something bigger. Back to Jeff Woolen, my professor at Indiana University. As far as connections go, I often take advantage of them. And so if I know someone, if I've worked with someone in the past, it's how we in the fine art industry kind of tend to operate and look out for each other. Once those connections are established, once you develop those, it's almost like a friendship. It exists and it's almost everlasting. And Jeff Woolen, in this body of work, it's called Stone Country. I think I mentioned it earlier. So he photographed, Indiana is known for its limestone. So he photographed the buildings and where the limestone is sourced. For some reason, that word is escaping me. Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about, but where limestone is taken out of the ground. So not only did he photograph the buildings where the limestone was used, but he created this story telling where it came from, the people that were involved, where the limestone went. So it's this very interesting dialogue that occurs between the photographs. And like I said, I brought him to the Fort Wayne Museum of Art because I knew about him in the past. I liked what he did. We also were able to do programming. Programming is another thing I'll talk a little bit more about. Programming is sometimes an unfamiliar word to some commercial photographers, even fine artists, which means panel discussions or podcasts or lectures. So we brought him to the museum and he was able to give a presentation about this project. Moving forward, my last major exhibition with that museum featured the architect Louis Kahn. So some of you might be familiar with him. He was actually the architect that designed the Salk Institute here in San Diego. And this was his only performing arts center that he ever designed. Unfortunately, he passed away not long after and wasn't able to complete some of his larger projects. But fortunately for us, however, at the museum, that performing arts center was located directly outside of our museum. And the organization that operated the building approached us and wanted to, really kind of honor him. And because of the proximity, I spent about 2 years digging through the archives and finding different content to bring, like ephemera, even like a concrete plinth from the original construction. One big, in blueprints, for example, one big component of those, this two large-scale two gallery exhibitions was photographs. So I'm assuming the photographers that were photographing the construction of this building, photographing the interior of the building, they probably didn't assume that their work was ever going to be featured in a museum exhibition or in many publications. So, you know, creating fine art work, you never really know who's going to approach you and say, we'd like to use that. One of the photographers that I actually work with currently, he's been approached by both Levi's and the Sorbonne in France. They want to use his work for different publications or different outlets. And you know, he's been a photographer for decades now, and so now he's getting these opportunities that he never expected. So you never know what kind of publications are going to approach you or what kind of research is going to happen, which gives you an opportunity. And that's, you know, ultimately that's why you want to do as much as you can and get your name out there as much as possible. After working at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, I decided to work independently. I created almost a self-imposed residency in New York. So I began hobnobbing with artists and galleries. I was incredibly fortunate to be able to dedicate all of my time to developing those relationships and continue building my knowledge of contemporary art. This led to many opportunities, which I still utilize and develop today, including some more that I'll tell you about shortly. This here, the photographs, you can see a portrait of myself on the right at the Whitney exhibition of Andy Warhol. I accidentally matched the exhibition. That wasn't on purpose. And then on the left, you can see one of their permanent gallery exhibitions. And so I was able to go to all of these places. You know, the Met, the Cloisters, which is a subset of the Met, and was really lucky to spend time, almost like a college degree, engaging with art. And it's another piece of advice that I'd like to offer. Again, if you're unable to pursue an institutional degree, almost like with PPA, there are so many ways that you can continue that education. And there are obviously many galleries and museums all over the world. We've got some fantastic ones just here in San Diego. Sorry about the lag. Here I am sitting inside Isamu Noguchi's sculpture at Dia Beacon in New York. And yes, I was allowed to do this. I wasn't breaking any rules. Dia Beacon is located upstate New York, and it is a beautiful multi-acre park and museum filled with sculptures of a lot of legendary 60s and 70s artists. And so I was able to do things like that as well. And I highly encourage you, as I've already said, to do as much of this as possible. And even just reading the didactics, like I already said, if you can go into a museum and study not just the art, but how the art is written about, because that's going to apply to your careers as well. Like, you need to be able to write in a professional way. And no, it doesn't need to be the loftiest writing. The art world writing can be very somewhat pretentious. You know, a word that's used often is visceral. You know, these very complicated words. We actually kind of have this, I feel like, this kind of funny list of words that are used over and over and over. So you'll start to notice those more the more you read about contemporary art. So Noguchi was a Japanese American landscape sculptor whose career began in the 1920s and spanned for about 6 decades. And his work was featured at Dia Beacon along with many others, including Mark de Suvero, who was actually outside of the Museum of Art, the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, where I worked at my last museum job. Another really valuable thing that you can do to learn more about art in the contemporary art world, let's see, there we go. So art shows, art fairs. So one of the big ones in New York, if you haven't heard about it, is the Armory Show. It happens every year. I think it may have been postponed last year, of course, due to coronavirus, but you're able to go, and for a small price, you're able to interact and hobnob with dozens of galleries and gallerists and their assistants. You can leave your business card. You can follow up with them. You can also see what's selling and who's buying what. And so it's an incredibly valuable opportunity. Here I am participating in a panel discussion with photographer and installation artist JR. If you're familiar with some of his work, he actually did a big piece at the border between San Diego and Mexico, and United States and Mexico. He did a piece there. So on another note, it's another way of how you can present your art in untraditional ways. So he actually wheat pasted his photographs in black and white up on walls, and that's his way of presenting his art. I actually don't think he does any actual framed work. So I was able to actually meet his gallerist, Jeffrey Deitch, through this process and interact with him, which was really great. So like I said, I was able to dive really deeply into some of the best institutions and museums around the country. If you're able to, I highly encourage it. But you even have so many opportunities here, like spending time at the SDMA, for example, or the Museum of Contemporary Art, different places like that. So it's just another way to educate yourself. And it's so important if you really want to get into the fine art world to have that background knowledge and to just surround yourself by it. And also networking, making those connections and maintaining those connections. They are probably one of the most important things you can do. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my recent exhibitions. Here are two recent exhibitions that I coordinated, curated, and implemented. One of them was actually here in San Diego at a new gallery located kind of under the 5 between Imperial Avenue and 16th Street. It's called 1835 Studios and Gallery. It's a community space with offices and events, and they do exhibitions as well. I was able to obtain this exhibition as a curator through connections. And let me show you just a little bit about, let me show you what that looked like. So this was a really fun exhibition, and I was able to bring in artists that I've worked with in the past, some street artists in New York, actually an artist in Indiana, an artist in Las Vegas, artists from around the country. And we were able to create interactive experiences, like you saw the child bringing open the art. This didn't feature any photographers, actually. I was going for more of a street art aesthetic, which is another different group of artists that I often work with, different street artists and things like that. So it had a very young crowd that attended it. So one thing we were able to do is create events around that. And as I will go on, it was also great too, just to mention again, the importance of those connections. I brought in people that I worked with in the past. So as a curator and consultant, I don't just work on projects with my artists, I keep them in mind and try to bring them into my work whenever possible. Oh. And this is a great example also of ways to take advantage of your exhibition opportunities, but also do it in a way that you're not, I wanted to make this doable for artists, especially working with artists around the country, not just from San Diego. While it did feature San Diego artists, I brought in people from other places, and that can be incredibly cost prohibitive. I know a lot of artists want to show their work in New York or Chicago, and sometimes the shipping, the matting, the printing, doing all of that, it's very cost prohibitive. And there are ways to get around that. That's one thing I really try to do for artists, because I know that can like be very limiting. That can prevent you maybe from engaging in an exhibition opportunity that you might be given. And so on the right, you'll see an image of some prints, and they're actually on vinyl material. So instead of having the artist ship their work to San Diego, I was able to print it on vinyl and adhere it to the gallery walls. I've done this in the past with artists too, where we've done large scale murals and things like that, taking photographs that might be relatively small and doing, you know, mural sized work, which is incredibly impactful. So really employing creativity in how you present your art can change the landscape of contemporary art, and can give you a bigger footprint as well. And on the left, there's another thing that I wanted to mention. Not only did we have the exhibition and an opening, but we had an art market outside. We did a podcast. We did 2 panel discussions. So we were giving artists opportunity. The artist actually, in the left image on the far right, she came in from Portland and she was able to be here with us in San Diego. So I wanted to give her ways to connect with the community, you know, going all the way to San Diego, spending that money. I want to create opportunities for the people I work with to create promotional content, you know, like different things that they can post online or use for their CD or on their website, and also to create things that can go out to the community, to build the community, because that's one thing that's very important to me as well. Another recent exhibition I did was with a gallery in New York called Solus Studio, and this exhibition was called Fun House. For lack of, without sounding redundant, it was an incredibly fun exhibition. It featured the artists that the gallery has worked with in the past, along with an artist that I brought in from Austin, Texas, named Combs or Chamberton. His work is featured on the left. I bring this example up because he is an artist that I found. I didn't have a pre-existing relationship with him, but I did research. I did research through Instagram, and it's something I utilize a lot when I'm looking for fine artists that I want to collaborate with on projects. So again, it's an example of how a curator can utilize different platforms to find you. You never know how that's going to end. So making yourself as visible as possible is very important. And so again, this exhibition consisted of, it was mixed media. All of the artists were able to come out. We did programming. We had a big opening, even, you know, with coronavirus. Hopefully we're out of that pretty soon, so we can kind of get back to a level of normalcy that makes, you know, traditional exhibitions and openings like that more possible. And this leads me to different ways, let's see, of untraditionally exhibiting your art. One of the main examples of this was featuring San Diego-based photographer John Raymond Morellis. We, in collaboration with the New York City Parks Department, this was at a park called the First Street Green Art Park. I actually just had another exhibition there this past weekend that was incredibly successful. So another example of how those relationships that you develop as a visual artist, you usually can continue building those. So they usually turn into bigger and better things. So this is an exhibition, a 1/4 mile exhibition of 4x5 large format photographs printed on perforated vinyl banner material. So again, a very different way of exhibiting your photographs. So it was exhibited on the outside of this park in downtown Manhattan at the busiest intersection, one of the busiest intersections in the city. And let me show you, I've got 2 quick videos that I'll show you about this so you can get a better idea of what that looked like. And I apologies in advance if the audio cuts out. I've been trying to figure this out. I haven't had too much luck. Let's see. Here's the installation. got one more to show you guys. I'm trying to get back to my screen. So you might have seen me bouncing around a little bit. It's kind of hard to tell. It was, sped up a little bit. We had a great group of volunteers that were willing to do this. If you can bring other people into your network, maybe not necessarily visual artists, but friends and family that'll come in and help you work on exhibitions or even critique your work, the more the merrier. And another big role that I have and that you all should have as well when you're working on projects, and I'll go into this a little bit more too, is content creation. So when I'm installing an exhibition, I take videos, I set up GoPros if possible. I have other people come in, maybe a family member or friend that they can just take photos, do interviews, create as much content as possible. Right now in the 21st century, it is so important. And another thing that's interesting to see in this is the way that people interact with the art. You can see people stopping to take photos, which is great because in a museum setting or in a gallery setting, your audience is quite limited. Not everyone can make it out to a museum or a gallery. So with a public installation or an untraditional way of presenting your art, you also have a lot of advantages. You're able to reach audiences that you might not otherwise reach. And you allow art to become a lot more friendly to people. So you kind of say like, this is fine art and you can engage with this too. So it's a really interesting way to be able to allow people to engage with your work. It has a lot of benefits. And so here's what the exhibition looked like once it was finished. And again, my apologies if the audio is choppy. If you want, you can just turn down your audio for a second, but I'll show you what this looked like. Again, it was a 1/4 mile, all 5 foot tall portraits, and I think consisted of maybe 80, something like that. Okay. So just a little bit of context. So this project was called Neighbors, and you could probably see some didactics, like I mentioned, didactics, text explaining the work featured so people could read more about the project. The Neighbors project, shot by the San Diego photographer John Raymond Morales. I was not only there to install the work, but another role that I had was to work with the Parks Department to handle all the logistics. I was also there when the portraits were being taken. So I traveled around the country working with a photographer to make sure we got the right images. He wanted to photograph Americans in all 50 states. So I also curated the exhibition. Curating an exhibition, sometimes it can be really overwhelming for a photographer, even when developing a body of work, to understand how to lay things out. It may not have been completely obvious, but all of these portraits were laid out in a very specific way to convey a very specific message, the relationship between each of them. And so it was a lot of fun. It was an incredibly amazing opportunity. We ended up traveling the exhibition around the country. This project was featured both in the New York Times as a public installation to get excited about, and then also The Guardian. See, so the power of publicity, don't underestimate it. Whenever possible, when you have opportunities to contact press, if you've got something that might be story worthy, do so. You may receive many no's, but then that gem will pop up, and it might be small, it might be big, it might be an interview, it might be something with public radio, like PBS, for example, is a really good outlet. Local media sources, especially if you're starting smaller in San Diego, there are a plethora of different local like city publications, blog writers, many opportunities. And whenever you, like I said, whenever you have an opportunity to do so, it's a great addition to a CV, a curriculum vitae, content for blog posts or digital mailers. It's very valuable. And sometimes even if you want to work with a consultant or a publicist, they can guide you on how to do that as well. And you may have noticed in the video that many of the works in the exhibition, the public installation, were heavily tagged. So the New York City Parks Department gave us a requirement: either they be cleaned or they be taken down and reinstalled. It wasn't possible to clean them, and it wasn't possible to reprint them. So unfortunately, the exhibition had to be taken down early. So instead of seeing this as a weakness or a wasted opportunity, the work was then utilized in another exhibition. They became historical artifacts, almost, you might say, recording an important moment in the annals of art. And so they were incorporated we traveled the exhibition to multiple other locations around the country, and we're still continuing to do so. But they were included in an exhibition actually in Camarillo with a nonprofit organization called Studio Channel Islands. Another great avenue if you're unsure of where to present your art, if you don't have access maybe to a traditional gallery or museum. There are many nonprofits that have access to grant money and funding sources like that are willing to work with you. And if you submit a proposal, if you seek them out, that's another great way to get your work in the hands of different places to develop those relationships. You can write proposals. You can work with a curator or consultant to figure out how to do that. There's also many resources online to kind of, guide you in that process too. So this work, the tagged work in New York, was then included in this exhibition, along with more portraits that were untagged, which also featured residents of Camarillo. So engaging the community and getting people in, that's another really important aspect of being a fine artist. It doesn't really help you if you exhibit in Chicago but can't engage Chicago, or maybe you don't have an audience in Chicago, because you want to be able to connect with the community that you're showing art to. So we were able to not only engage the community, but we were able to include some historically relevant information, and also, represent the project authentically. So New York, this project in New York is one example, again, of how one opportunity can lead to another. This project then traveled to Oklahoma City, where these portraits, even larger than 4 by 5 foot, were installed on the exterior of a building in downtown, a major building in downtown Oklahoma City. And larger than life, another way of presenting your photographs. These were attached or printed on self-adhesive vinyl material, so they were actually stuck to the windows of this building. And so the New York installation led to the Oklahoma City installation. And now actually next month, we are revisiting Oklahoma City, working with the Oklahoma City Black Museum and Performing Arts Center. We photographed in that community, and we're going to be creating basically a public park in a vacant building in an underprivileged neighborhood. So we're going to have a space for food trucks and the community to come together. And we're bringing all of that together with art. And again, untraditional media, the mediums, these photographs will be attached on more vinyl material to fins. So you could even approach, like in New York, a public park or the side of a building. Maybe there's a building and where you'd see a mural or something. you could present your work like a mural. So there's so many ways to kind of bridge that gap and get to the places where you want to go, maybe the larger museums, maybe the MoMAs of the world. And on that note, as I've already probably made clear, John Morellis is one fantastic example of how a commercial photographer has made his way into the fine art world. So he actually began his career and spent several decades photographing, weddings and things like that, and decided to pursue a visual art career. And you can see he's done relatively successfully. He's been successful in doing that. And I encourage you all to look at his work. I have actually worked to coordinate and curate all of the exhibitions listed on his website, and there's some really interesting projects to look at. Also, the artist statements are good examples too. And on a side note, often the word gatekeeper is used in the visual art world, excuse me. So it's a big obstacle for emerging artists. One thing I'm trying to communicate to you all with this presentation is the different little steps you can take to get to those galleries that you might dream of showing in. While this may seem, the gatekeepers, let me backtrack just a little bit. Gatekeepers, what that word essentially means is the people that essentially shut their doors on you because you may not have a lengthy CV, or you may not have shown enough, or you may not have, like gotten the education, you may not have the MFA or something like that. And it's kind of requisite in that world. So you might think like, wow, I can't do anything. Like I can't do anything unless I go and get my MFA. And that's simply just not true, especially now, again, with the internet and all of the ways we have networking and communicating with other artists and institutions and things like that. So one example that I like to bring up, and it may seem a little unrelated, but it involves muralists. So traditional mural painters. It's an example of the gatekeepers in our visual art world. So for a muralist, often to receive an opportunity to work with a city or something, or paint on the side of a building, you must have a track record of the work you've done in the past. So how do you make that happen? It's the same that applies to fine art photographers. How do you make it happen if you don't have the really lengthy CV? One group that I am familiar with in my hometown, actually, and I've worked with a little bit, is called, it's an organization called the Open Wall Project. And what this allows artists or muralists to do is come in, paint a wall, photograph the wall, with the catch that someone else can come and immediately paint over your work. So it's not necessarily about creating something everlasting, but what it does is it allows these muralists to build up their bodies of work and build up a portfolio. So just like being a fine artist, a fine art photographer, if you can find an opportunity that might be a little bit smaller, but something that you can add to your CV, here's an exhibition that I did, or here's this opportunity, or here's some photos of how I presented my art. So then these muralists are able to approach cities and say, here's these 6 or 7 examples of work that I've created that you require from me to give me this opportunity. So again, this is where untraditional exhibitions come into play, or untraditional ways of presenting your art are valuable, and also where creative thinking comes into play, like really figuring out how can I do more than just hanging my photograph on the wall, matted and framed. So why does an online presence matter? I think I've, really kind of given you guys a few bits of that already, but it really is probably the most important thing you can focus on. And that leads me to websites. Let's talk about websites. So I look at websites right now as, and I try to communicate this to artists I work with, they're more like digital portfolios. We don't live in the world anymore where it's necessary to have, and it is still applicable in some situations, but to have the big, finely printed bodies of work that a gallerist can flip through. Essentially, like I've said, when I go to an artist's website, I'm looking at their portfolio. So besides in some unique situations, this is where professionals and the public will see your brand. That's where they will see you. And your professional presentation is absolutely critical. You want a user-friendly, simple way for people to see who you are and what you do. And that involves some different components that, it is flexible. But this is an example of a digital portfolio that I built for a photographer, Stanley Steller. that I work with, he lives in New York. He's a fantastic example, again, of a documentary portrait photographer who shot in New York, in the city from the 1970s until today. So please visit his website, not only to see what a website could look like, what it should look like, the professional presentation of that, but also to learn more about his work. He's a pretty legendary photographer and a very important historical photographer as well. I will say that there's quite a bit of nudity, so go forth with caution. Here's another example of a digital portfolio that I built for an artist. You can see this is the cover page, and it's very clear. It's you know what you're getting into. What if I want to buy one of his prints, or what if I want to see his prints? It's very clear. You know, some of the elements that you really should include on your website. You want well curated bodies of work. You want artist statements, contact information, your CV, your curriculum vitae, and a way for you to collect emails so you can reach out to the people that may buy your work or may be interested in your work. So you can do things like digital mailers, like sending out monthly emails to people saying, you know, this is what I've done, this is what I've been working on. Besides social media, it's a really valuable tool for fine artists. And again, just reaching out to people as often as much as possible, increasing your footprint. These are also the main point of contact for anyone who may reach out to you about press and exhibition opportunities, print sales, things like that. So not only is this a digital portfolio, showing your work without actually physically printing it or physically taking it to someone, but it's also a way for you to sell prints, for example. And it's a great, you know, as a fine artist, any way you can make a little bit of extra money to support your career and build other opportunities, it's good to take advantage of those. I worked with abstract painter, he's actually a San Diego painter, Alex Sasha Toporowski, and his main goal was to create a platform presenting work to acquire opportunities without a lengthy CV. So this may apply to some of you. He doesn't really have a huge history of exhibiting his work. So how do we say I'm a professional artist without having the extensive CV? Well, you know, again, presenting the bodies of work, writing good art, solid artist statements, and communicating this level of professionalism while you continue to build up your CV. Besides websites, as I've already mentioned, there are other ways to get attention for your work, especially as visual artists. We are lucky to have several free and pre-existing platforms that allow us to do this. Here is a TikTok video example of content I created to promote my own visual art career as a painting. Just a fun little example.
Started my morning stretching. I like to burn negative thoughts. Just a little thing I do. I hauled in some boxes to ship paintings. I started working on new business cards, finished editing a short film. That's my cat Rosita. She's a troublemaker. Sold a painting. I'm putting the top coat down. I visited my 94-year-old grandma. She's so cute. Took the painting to the post office, worked on more paintings, crawled into bed, absolutely exhausted.
So TikTok, I don't know if you guys are all familiar. I think I received some reservations from a lot of artists I work with. You know, maybe I don't want to pursue that path, or I don't want to use Instagram. But it allows you to connect with the people that care about your work. So it's not just about showing them what you do, it's about showing them who you are. And if you can connect with people, you're going to make people want to buy your work, because it's not just about the work you produce, it's about who you are as an artist. And so resources like TikTok and Instagram are really great because we can do that without interfacing one-on-one with someone. And in the digital world, it opens up our audiences. So it's very important. And one big thing about these online platforms is consistency. I often see a lot of artists maybe post once and then not post for 3 months, or then post 2 weeks later. And you really want to be on top of your consistency. It does take a lot of work. It's almost like a part-time job in itself, if not a full-time job. And Instagram, for example, it's not just about posting a photo. You can do stories now. You can do reels. You can do you can archive your post, and it becomes this multifaceted way for people to explore who you are. And different ways you can do this, as I just showed you with my video. I'm showing you behind the scenes, like a day in the life of an artist. So you can show your process, how you do things, how you're thinking, your shoots. Maybe you document, you have someone photograph your shoot, or like I showed with the Neighbors Project in New York, the process of actually making the installation. People love that stuff. It's not just about the work, it's about the behind the scenes. So working in the studio, statements about your work, maybe you even just sit down and record yourself saying, this is why I did this project. It's more than just someone going to your website and reading your artist statement. There are other ways to do that. And the more you can do, the better. The more people that you can access, the better. And it just opens up many more doors for you.
Started my morning stretching.
One example of this, back to muralist, this is an artist called America Creo. I went to high school with her from my small town in Indiana. It can seem almost daunting for an artist to break out of this very confining mold. But she is a muralist that really started just a few years ago, but she has utilized social media and marketing to paint murals in all 50 states. She's already made a huge amount of progress towards that goal. And it's because she is so on top of her online presence. She regularly posts often on many platforms. You can even see in this photo here that she is matching her dress to her mural. It may seem a little overkill, but honestly, it gets people very excited. It's just another way to engage with people and to create excitement. And she has really honed her business skills and manages her career independently. And honestly, it's very impressive. And she's another artist that, if you're interested in learning more about self-promotion and the importance of social media, I encourage you to look up her work. Even though she may not be a photographer, it's all skills and techniques that we need to employ. So the benefits of working with a consultant and a curator. Firstly, you can understand how to advance your career. Like some of the things that I'm sharing with you now, they're all things that I tell the clients that I work with. You learn how to craft a CV, you learn how to write an artist statement, you have feedback on your artist statement, you learn how to tighten your bodies of work. You also access services such as task management software, client management software, ways to send digital proposals to museums and galleries that many of you might not otherwise many of you might not be familiar with or might be unable to access. And then connections. As I've already brought up many times, I continue to bring the artists that I've worked with for years now into other exhibitions. I introduce them to other artists. I help lead them to galleries and museums that would be a good fit for their work. So you have access to, this database of information. Thirdly, connections. I can't stress that enough. I kind of already mentioned that, but just understanding how to develop those and how to access more of those. And then most importantly, I think, is the assistance, because if you're developing a career while working as a commercial photographer, while raising a family, developing a website, writing press releases, contacting press, creating content, contacting galleries, and so on, do you really even have time to focus on the most important thing, which is creating your own work? It's several full-time jobs easily. So bringing someone else into the mix, even if it's not a consultant or curator, an assistant or someone that can help you do that, it may seem unnecessary, but it's almost it's a very important part of taking your career to the next level. It can be very limiting not to take advantage of resources like that. It's often too much for one person to handle, but the investment really is worth it. And sometimes, often as artists, and I speak both as an artist myself and someone from the arts administration side, at the beginning, there's going to be some times where you think like, wow, I've got to dump money into this and I don't know what's going to happen. And it's usually a part of what we do. But it eventually pays off. It's going to pay off in some kind of way. So here is my CV, my curriculum vitae, and it includes the most relevant and important examples of past work. This is a condensed version. It primarily focuses on the recent exhibitions that I've done. What should you include? It depends really on what you have to add. You want to highlight the best of your past accomplishments and also include information that will guide you to your goals. So you want gallery exhibitions? focus on building up that section. So what you see here, like I said, is my list of recent exhibitions. And so I focus on that. One important thing for me is to keep gaining exhibitions. So a goal of mine is to maintain about 5 new exhibitions a year. If someone sees a big lapse, it's almost like if someone sees a big lapse in your resume, like if you haven't worked for 4 or 5 years, an employer might say, what's been going on? Why haven't you been working? Are you seriously dedicated to this? So if you want to obtain gallery and museum exhibitions, start smaller. Like I said, think of the untraditional ways that you can present art. Those are incredibly valuable additions to your CV, but maybe you want to be published, seek out different smaller opportunities to build up to the larger opportunities, such as fine art books. Maybe you want to have a coffee table book published of your work. There are thousands of opportunities. I haven't really touched upon that too much, but again, access to the internet, there are thousands of opportunities online for you to have your work published digitally, in smaller prints, internationally, in the country. And one side note regarding that is I like to always mention, be wary of paid opportunities. They can be incredibly beneficial, even like paid opportunities to have your work critiqued and everything. Look into things, do some research, make sure you know what you're getting into. They can be beneficial because they reduce competition, because you know, not everyone is going to want to pay to participate in something if if there's no guarantee that something's going to manifest out of that opportunity. But they can also be a big money pit. So your money may be better spent in other ways. Like I said, maybe hiring a consultant or spending money on a publicist or something like that. So it can be a little challenging to juggle what is and is not the most valuable use of your money, because I know, for me, at least as an artist, I have limited resources. So I have to, almost like budgeting for life, you have to figure out if you want to buy a new pair of shoes or if you want to pay your bills. And typically you have to, you have to pick one or the other. You can't always have everything. So fundamentally with a CV, you want to include a list of some of the elements. You want to include a list of exhibitions, your education, various publications or press that you've been featured in, and related professional experience, whether that be maybe you worked at a gallery or you have volunteered at this museum, anything like that that's relevant to who you are and what you're doing. And if your CV can't be lengthy at first, like most of us, figure out the weaknesses and figure out like how you can obtain those opportunities. Like I said, maybe you do some online submissions to get your work on a blog post or something like that. There's no shortage of those opportunities available. So on that note, I hope this was helpful to you all. I talked very quickly and I covered a whole bunch. If you're interested in chatting about your work or learning more about what I do, here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out either on Instagram, through phone or email, or you can visit my website to see a little bit more about the work that I do for people. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have shared what I do with you guys. I look forward to hearing from you. And like I said, please stick around if you have any questions.
Oh, that was amazing, Tiffany. Thank you. So interesting and informative. Does anybody have any questions for Tiffany right now? Hello, anyone? We're all muted here. Teresa's saying thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I guess I have a few questions then. Dan,
Yeah.
you're muted too. Do you have questions?
How does one find curators?
Huh. Well, curators are typically associated with museums, right? So they work in institutional settings often. I decided not to work with museums because I felt like it took away from my creativity a little bit. So often what I ended up doing was traveling like the same Van Gogh exhibition that had been shown over and over and over around the country. And I didn't really have a voice in what I was doing. So if you want to find a curator, it's a little challenging. We kind of like hide a little bit, I think, but Instagram is a good way to do that. Doing some research, what do I want to say? You can also go to a museum website. So one thing I try to help artists do is write proposals to reach out to museums and to actually contact those curators. But if you want to work with an independent curator, typically a good way to do that is actually seek out some galleries or some exhibitions, do some research on those, and a curator will be listed. And it will say curated by this artist or curated by this curator, and you can go and find their contact information and reach out to them. If you want a consultant, the same theory kind of applies. A Google search is a good way to do it, but I think one of your best options would be like maybe going to a gallery website, and sometimes they'll have a guest curator listed. And those guest curators, us and us weird unicorns, we kind of bounce around and work with different institutions. I don't typically stick with, I don't work with one gallery. I work with many around the country. So it can be a little hard to find one. And it's not your only avenue for doing so. You can also handle a lot of this yourself and even reach out. Maybe you like a gallery and say, is there any way we can work together? But working with a curator does add a lot of legitimacy to what you're doing. And that's something I like to tell artists too. When you approach a museum with a curator on your team, you say, especially if you don't maybe have a super lengthy CV, you're saying like, I'm working with this professional. I'm serious about what I do. So it just involves some research. Instagram is another really valuable tool to do that. You can search, like I said, galleries will often use guest curators. So that's a good place to start.
Okay.
There's a question in the chat is how do curators decide what to select for a show?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. Speaking from my own experience, usually I conceptualize a show and so I'm working with a new gallery in San Diego. We're opening an exhibition in December. I approached them and said, I have this concept for a show. Here's some of the artists that I'd like to bring into this exhibition, and they fit into this concept for these reasons. So that involves some artists that I've worked with in the past and also some that I'm bringing in for the first time. And a curator, when I'm actually putting the pieces together, one thing that the last director of the museum that I worked with said, curators have an eye. They understand how to do a layout for an exhibition. They understand how to pick different things that just work together. And it also requires a level of creativity too, and also just, an independent perspective. So a curator in essence is an artist too. Putting together a show is almost like a piece of art. So a lot of components go into that to try to figure out, this is the piece that I'm going to use. Sometimes it seems a little just like haphazard, like how did this all come together? But reading about didactics too is the more and more you can read about art. Reading, a great resource for this is going to gallery websites too and reading about the exhibitions that they have or their upcoming museum websites too. So you can research how the show came together or read about, the concept behind it, and then take a look at what's actually in the exhibition. And you can kind of piece that together and say, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense why this was included. One example that I recently saw was a museum curated a body of work of political art. So they brought in artists from around the country. So obviously that curator could have picked from thousands of different artists, but they decided on this specific group of people, brought them in, maybe loaned work from private collectors, maybe picked new works out. It's a complicated process. It's just an accurate example of how crazy this world can become very quickly.
So interesting. My brain is trying to process all this right now. I don't know if everybody else is sitting there thinking that. So then, okay, so with that whole, what you just said in mind, so do you say, okay, they're going to do, like you say, politically motivated art or whatever. So then you think, oh, I've got these specific artists in mind. So then do you ever go to the artist and say, okay, I know you haven't created any politically motivated art, but will you create something for this? Or do you go find people that have already created politically charged art and then pick them? Does it go both ways?
It's both. And one thing I try to tell artists too is if you're like presented with an opportunity for a commission or something, great, but make sure you stay true to yourself too. You know, it's great to create art specifically for a show. And again, as photographers, or artists in general, you want it to stay true to like some kind of body of work or something similar to what you've done in the past. And I think photographers especially, it's expected of us to create bodies of work, not just standalone images. So I actually, with the San Diego exhibition that's happening in December that I just mentioned, I've worked with one artist in the past and I've said, well, you've done work like this in the past. Would you be willing to create similar work? Here's some of the keywords that the exhibition is going to, you know, be conceptualized around. Are you interested in participating? And of course, the artist always has the opportunity to say no, or maybe, and you know, even they may even create something. And I sometimes unfortunately have to say, this doesn't exactly work with what we're doing. That doesn't happen often though. Usually we collaborate a little bit. So not only do I seek out art or pieces of art that may work for a show, I work with artists that I've worked with that I know would fit with the exhibition. Or sometimes I say, would you be interested in maybe you've done paintings on canvas. Would you be willing to paint on skateboards? Or would you be willing to do a vinyl print? Or would you be willing just to do, you know, do physical prints? You know, do you want to do something traditional? And sometimes an artist says, well, no, I'd rather not do that. Or maybe they say, yes, I would like to do that because I don't have the budget right now to frame and print and mat everything. So it involves a lot of collaborating with artists actually too, a lot of messaging back and forth to figure out what works with the gallery, what works with me, what works with the artist. So, you know, and as I said at the very beginning of my presentation, I try to really tailor what I do to every single artist that I work with because every situation is so vastly unique.
Okay, so then other questions that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. So if when you were saying, and it really resonated with me, that you can't do all this yourself. And I know a lot of the artists in this group, we end up being a one-man band. Like we have to learn how to design websites and then we have to learn how to do all these things and we just don't want to do it. So when we're looking for somebody like you to hire, what kind of ballpark, like what can we expect to pay for that? Is it usually a percentage? Is it an hourly fee? I mean, I know everybody's going to charge differently, but how do we go about figuring that out?
It's case by case. Consulting can usually range from $50 an hour to $250 an hour, depending on who you're working with. And it also depends on the scope of the project. You know, building a digital portfolio or website is going to be significantly more time consuming than, you know, me looking at an artist statement and saying, this is how you could massage this. That's actually one thing I try to do with artists too. Maybe if they're operating on a smaller budget, I say, I actually play the consulting role, which is, okay, here's what you need to do. Come back to me when you have this finished and we'll go over it together. Like I could write the entire artist statement for you, but that's going to take 5 hours. But if you just want to do a consulting call and figure out what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are here, how you could do things differently, maybe that'll take us 30 minutes or an hour or something like that. And commission for curators. So commission for curators typically is a relationship with a gallery. So when I work on curating a show with a gallery, I usually receive a percentage of what sells. And that is independent of what the artist receives. So they get their percentage, I receive mine, and mine is part of the gallery's commission. So, and a gallery commission is usually around 50-50. Sometimes you'll work with like a nonprofit or something and they'll give you like 60 or 70%. So it's all over the board. And commission, when commission does affect me and in a relationship with an artist, is typically if I sell to a private collector. So if I say, hey, this buyer would really love your work. Let's sell this piece to them. Or hey, we're gonna sell this piece to a museum. I receive a commission on top of the hourly work involved in doing something like that. And I didn't really get too detailed about the benefits of doing proposals or how you go about doing proposals. They're a whole nother beast. But and like I said, having the legitimacy of having a curator or consultant behind you to work on those proposals and send them out instead of just, you know, blindly sending them out yourself. There's a lot of benefits of doing that too. Even understanding which is the right gallery for me to approach. Like, do I just send this out to hundreds of different galleries and, you know, spend dozens of hours of my time? It's lots of those little details that make bringing a consultant into your circle pretty valuable.
That's all very good information. With everything she just said, does anybody else have any more questions along that line? Everybody's still kind of.
Well, I first want to say thank you. Very great presentation. You speak
you.
as faster than me, but you say a lot more. And just so organized. And I was just taking down notes for a lot of great ideas and inspiration I was getting from you, and even people that I could maybe do a project with. And, you know, that is, well, anyway, just really good ideas. And I thank you for all of this.
Yeah, thank you. You're so welcome. I just saw in the chat, someone also said, who prices the work? I didn't really get, that's, you know, that's a big conversation that I engage in with my artists as well. Most artists are completely baffled when it comes to pricing work, and it involves so many details. It involves what you've shown in the past, how much you've sold in the past, what market you're selling to. So I'm able to price work for artists, and it involves a lot of details, like I said, and it's kind of this delicate dance on trying to figure that out. There's not one easy answer for that. So who prices the work? If you go to a gallery, sometimes they'll assist you with that, but working with another professional in arts administration, they're kind of able to help you identify things, maybe like what's sold. Another element of that is what's sold recently, like what's the market like right now. That impacts your work too. A lot of artists that I've worked with think it's simply like this equation of my materials cost this much, my printing costs this much, I've spent this amount of time creating the work. And it's much more than that. It involves so many other elements. And I would encourage people to maybe work with a consultant to kind of try to figure that out. But there's not even really a general rule. I would love to give you guys a more solid answer for that, but it just depends on a lot of variables. If you wanted to simplify it as much as possible, like I said, you can say these were my material costs, and I at least want to cover my material costs. But one piece of advice I will give is price your work for whatever people will be willing to pay for it. And don't undervalue your work. It is not a good look to just sell your art to make a couple bucks. If you want to appear to be a professional artist, you want to price your work like professional artists. You can get some good examples of this by visiting galleries or art fairs too. You can see how other artists are pricing their work and what they've done in the past, like how much have they shown, and then kind of a reflection of that. And it also depends, like I said, on the market. Maybe you're selling to more of I like to call it like designer art or hotel art, some of the more decorative places, maybe a business that wants to show their art. Typically budgets like that are a little bit higher, but if you really want to get your work in the hands of private collectors, a whole different set of rules apply. So it's definitely worth either doing some research or talking to a professional about that, because you don't want to undervalue your work, but you also want to sell it. So, you know, if you want to, it's a complicated answer.
I think there was one more in the chat that says, do venues put out a theme for what they're looking for in an upcoming show, or do they keep it quiet and have the curators put it together?
It's both. So one way that often works, and you can see this a lot online. Instagram is another great resource for locating apposite opportunities for showing your work. And like I said, you know, applying to some of these, some of them cost money, some of them don't, but they'll put out a theme. And a lot of these are group shows. You're probably not going to get a show with 2 or 3 artists. It might be a larger selection, maybe 10 or 15. But a gallery might say, we've got this concept. We want to feature artists that explore the concept of water, you know, maybe not literally water, but you know, what water means to you. And then you submit your work, you submit an artist statement. So you want to have that composed in a professional way. You want to have your website together. You need all those elements combined, and then the curator, or the what's the other word that I'm thinking of? Sometimes there's a juror that, another name basically for a curator, that goes through the applications and says, okay, this works with the theme the best. So you can find a lot of those. A lot of galleries will post opportunities like that, different publications, different nonprofits. You can do a quick Google search and find them too. It takes a little bit of digging usually, but if you want to pursue options like that, those are it's a really valid way of getting some exhibitions to add to your CV. So again, it might be like a little bit smaller. It might not be a solo exhibition in a New York gallery, but it allows you to build up your CV and say, I participated in this exhibition at this gallery in 2021, and I participated in 5 exhibitions this year. So you're able to build up that CV. But the keeping it quiet part, when I'm curating an exhibition and I can kind of conceptualize an idea, I'm not putting out on my Instagram, hey, calling all artists, I'm looking for people that do that. I typically am putting in the research myself. So again, like I said, that's why it's important to have that online presence, so I can find you, so I can see like, okay, this is what I'm thinking. This artist aligns with my thoughts. And if you're not visible, then I have no way of reaching out to you, or no way of understanding that you might be in line with what I'm trying to accomplish. So keeping it quiet, maybe not necessarily keeping it quiet, but sometimes there's not a call for entry. So it goes both ways.
I have a question about digital files.
Mm-hmm.
So you do an exhibition for a photographer, and do you ever have, I mean, people say, well, we live in a digital world, whatever, and we have everything on our computers, or we love this artist's work, but they're not a collector necessarily that's going to have this hanging on their walls. Do you offer, I mean, it sounds so unprofessional compared to galleries, paintings and photos that you would buy, but do you ever or offer prints and files of photos that have been exhibited?
Yeah, well, so like I said, with the 1835 exhibition that I recently did in San Diego this past March, I offered, we had a database of prints of all of the artists that were included in the exhibition. So instead of the artists going and printing 10 or 20 prints with like no guarantee that they were going to sell anything, we said, if you're interested in this piece, you can visit this site and we will print on demand for you.
Oh.
And then so we would drop ship the print to the buyer. And it also is a more affordable way for buyers to engage in art. Print sales, as I mentioned, are a fantastic way to sell without diminishing the value of your work. And as photographers, we're presented with a unique challenge because we don't have paintings, or we don't have any other thing than prints to sell. So editioning is a good way to value your art in different ways. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
In part, it doesn't answer the part about the files, whether you would recommend not selling your digital files.
No, I think it's an industry standard, obviously, for us to hang on to our originals. I can't really see a reason unless you offered rights to use images, but that's more of like the commercial art world. Like Stanley Steller, the photographer that I showed you earlier in the presentation, he was the photographer that was just approached by Levi's to use his documentary photography for their advertising purposes. So we've had to come up with a really unique licensing agreement so that they use those, but they have limited rights to them. So they weren't just sold the images. He still maintains the copyrights for those images, but they're allowed to use them for certain purposes. That typically doesn't happen in the fine art world too much. The few unique situations where that would is if a gallery wants to use it for promotional purposes or something like that, but they still don't have the rights to keep them forever. They're just using them for maybe like a postcard or something to promote the exhibition. And the same applies for press and things like that. They may ask to use your image typically, you should demand that you receive credit if it's being published. Obviously you want your name associated with wherever it's going. But I don't really see. The only other thing that I will mention about that, though, some of you may have heard of NFTs. NFTs are another, like, I could present on NFTs for several hours, probably. It's a very confusing, strange world. It mostly applies to digital artists, and digital artists do fall into, obviously, or photographers obviously do fall into the digital art world. But what NFTs really are, in their most simplest terms, they're a way for people that create like memes and GIFs and digital drawings, that there isn't like an actual physical way for them to like an original copy of their work, so they can sell that original copy. So yes, photographers can definitely engage with NFTs. It is possible. And it's another conversation. Again, if anyone wants to talk more about NFTs, it's a very confusing new world. Is there much longevity in NFTs? That's yet to be seen. It's almost like the first trip to Mars or something. We're still kind of trying to figure out what that means and how it's useful for artists, but it's basically selling the original copy. The artist, again, though, they still maintain the rights to use the original however they want, but someone is saying, I buy this digital version, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
NFTs is, you're right, it's a whole other rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah.
But very interesting. So we have another question in the chat. It says, are you searching themes on Instagram, or how do you do your research on Instagram?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I approach Instagram in similar ways to using Google, or using Google to search for artists or locate artists, fitting artists for an exhibition or a project that I'm working on. So hashtags, I'm sure some of you guys use hashtags on your Instagram. Hashtags allow me to search something like San Diego artist, and then I'm able to punch that in and say, okay, I need some San Diego artists for this exhibition. Let's see what comes up. And I'll get a list of different images, and I'll be able to say, okay, that looks maybe relevant to the exhibition that I'm doing. And I'll reach out, I'll send a message, and I'll say, hey, my name is Tiffany, I'm a curator. Would you be interested in chatting about this? Other ways of doing research, sometimes I'll go to a San Diego artist profile, and I'll see who's following them, or who they're following, or maybe some other people that have commented on their work. Or maybe I'll even reach out to those artists and say, do you know of anyone else that might be willing to participate in this? And then I follow people, or sometimes I just happen to stumble across someone. You can do a lot of strange searching on Instagram. As I mentioned, curating involves a lot of research. It's not just putting pieces together on the wall and figuring out your linear space to make something look cohesive in person, but it's making a concept that's really solid and putting those pieces together before it even hits the wall.
Very good. Let's see, I know someone had been asking about being published. I know you talked about the New York Times and the Guardian. How would one go about contacting a publication and getting published?
Well, publicists are a very valuable tool. One thing I do offer, I try to be a one-stop shop for the people that I work with. And I also write press releases and maintain contacts with media outlets as well. But that's something a publicist does too. Publicists, they cost as well, but they do have those connections. They're really kind of another form of the gatekeepers in the fine art world. And you can do it independently. Again, having someone on your team that's a professional gives you a little bit more a clout. So instead of an artist just approaching a newspaper, you can say, I can say, I work with this artist. We're working on this amazing project. Would you like to feature it? And locating appropriate avenues for that too. So instead of just blindly reaching out to every newspaper in San Diego, it's like, okay, this is one I've worked with in the past. They're really good at doing stories on art. Let's approach them. And so yeah, it's good to just reach out and maintain a database of different contacts, especially if you're showing maybe in San Diego. start compiling a list of newspapers or, PBS contacts or magazines, and the person that is responsible, maybe the editor or one of the writers, and their email and their phone number. And on that note, one thing that I really like to tell artists is don't give up. If you don't hear back from someone, reach out to them again. Reach out to them until they say no, until they literally slam the door on you, because it might feel a little bit embarrassing or something, but it could just be that your email got lost, or it could be that they're too busy and they didn't have the time to get back to you. So, as I said in the presentation, you're going to dig up those gems. It does take a lot of work, but the work pays off. Inevitably, it's going to pay off somehow.
Amazing. So much great information, Tiffany. I think I can speak for everybody that this has been an excellent program. You did a fantastic job. I can see all the smiles here. Yeah, if anybody has any more questions for Tiffany, speak now. Anyone? Bueller?
I think we need time to digest a lot of it.
So Tiffany, if they want to get a hold of you, can you put your contact info in the chat for us? Or I know it was in the email, correct?
It was on the video earlier.
It was in the video earlier, but is it best to email you?
Why don't I just pull it back up for a second? And if anyone would like to take a screenshot or write it down, you can do so now.
That's a great idea. There we go. You can hear the screenshots. And you are local here in San Diego?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Okay, everybody. That's some really, really good information. I'm sure all our wheels are spinning. I'm thinking of like, oh, what am I going to create next?
It was a lot. It was a lot of information.
Yeah.
It's a great way to kick off your marketing for our presentations. I'm talking to you, Michelle.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
You'll
We have to thank Antoine too. Antoine suggested we bring Tiffany in.
Yes, Antoine is great. Antoine is actually one of the artists that I work with in San Diego. So, hey, another example of a connection in the art world that leads to something else. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, because those of us that started with Antoine, we have really seen the growth in him.
Mm-hmm.
There's been such a difference in getting his emails, and I can see what he's doing. And I knew he was working with someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's definitely paying off for him.
Good. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. He's an amazing artist. It's so fun to see his work. So, all right. Does everybody have Tiffany's info written down there? It's all good.
And like I said, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if anyone would like to grab coffee or anything like that. Again, I'm freelance, so my schedule is incredibly flexible, and I love interfacing with artists whenever possible.
Well,
I encourage you all to do so too, even if you just have friends that are artists, making those, having those conversations. It's not going to do anything but provide opportunities for growth.
For sure. I'm going to be calling you. I got ideas. I got some ideas. All right, we're going to unshare your screen here, Tiffany. Everybody's so quiet. Are we tired? We're still processing, I think. Normally everybody's a little more chatty, but that was so much information. Lisa says, thank you, great presentation. Yes, that was really good. Dan, what are you thinking?
Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dan's got some amazing work that I was thinking about you, Dan, as she was talking, because talking about, the galleries that you've been asked to display at, and then they want you to print out these giant metal images and ship them off to them. And some of us are starving artists, and we're thinking, well, it's a fantastic opportunity to be in these galleries, but do we really have the money?
Even if you do sell a lot of work as an artist, those expenses add up very quickly, and it's often just not reasonable. So we have to figure out different ways to do that. And I also wanted to bring up really quickly, one of the exhibitions that I've worked on with John Raymond Morales is actually up at the San Diego Museum of Art. It's a free exhibition. So you can go in Balboa Park, and it's a really interesting exhibition. The exhibition featured these beautiful landscape photographs from Southern Utah that were deaccessioned by our former president, and opened up for private mining and drilling. So in about 3 weeks ago, the museum took those prints down and allowed the public to come in and destroy them with different like gardening tools and hammers and paints and things like that. So it's a symbolic representation of the damage that will affect these landscapes in the future. So again, just another unconventional way that you can figure out how to make your work more impactful or different or exist in the contemporary realm, besides just being, you know, your very traditional way of presenting photographs on a white wall.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a great exhibition.
Ah, cool. All right, you guys. Well, it's a little bit after 8. So if anybody has a questions, last chance, last call here for questions for Tiffany.
I'd just like to say thank you for the presentation.
You're so welcome.
I kind of went out of photography for about 20, 30 years. Now I'm trying to get back into it pretty much. So
That's great.
I used to remember the San Diego Art Institute years and years ago. So
Oh,
Yeah,
very
thank
good.
you.
appreciate your presentation.
Should be motivated by this, that's for sure. All right, well, I'm gonna stop our recording now. Everybody's done with their, and then we can